Really happy to be back with you. This is a special time of the year, I think, as both of you have said. And I just wanted to connect back to what we discussed the last couple of weeks. We talked about a very important subject, which is purpose. Purpose in our lives as individuals, especially as leaders, but also the purpose of our organization. And I think looking at some of the key challenges there, it's one thing to come up with a great purpose. It's another thing to make that purpose really live in the organization, make it real for everybody so that it impacts everything that they do and the decisions that they make. And if we can do that, and especially the big challenges for our frontline employees, the executives can get the purpose, they're part of creating it. Middle management also can get it, but sometimes it does not translate to the front lines. And what the research is showing, and there's a lot of new research coming out on this as well, is that the link between purpose and performance really depends a lot on the extent to which management and leadership is clear about it and how it translates into action, and then how it impacts throughout the organization, not just at the top, right? So that is really what purpose is ultimately about in terms of making an impact on the business. And today we're going to turn to culture. How does it feel to be part of our business? The emotional connection that we have with our employees especially, but of course our culture will impact all of our stakeholders, especially our customers. And ultimately, to me, it's about creating a healing culture, a place where people can go, they can feel safe, they can feel valued, they are excited to go there, right? They are seen, they are heard, so we can bring more joy into their lives, we can reduce their suffering, and we can promote healthy growth. So that's really what a healing culture looks like. My presentation. And make sure we have the subtitles. Okay. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes, Raj, we can.
Okay, great. Let me put my timer so make sure I don't go over. So again, the topic today is a conscious and caring culture. We use both of those words. It's a conscious culture. We're thinking about what the culture is. Every company has a culture, whether you think about it or whether you try to be mindful about it or not. And the question is, can we be conscious about our culture? And of course, can we create a culture of genuine caring? So again, to put it back into the frame of conscious capitalism, the 4 pillars: healing, stakeholders, leadership, and culture. We have talked about, purpose, stakeholders, and leadership and culture. And we've talked about purpose. And now today we're going to talk about the how. How does it feel to work here, and how do we operate, right? What are the norms and practices that we have in our business? And how is very important. All of these things are important. Why we do something matters, how we do something matters, and of course, what we do matters, right? So this can be, a big differentiator for many companies. And we'll talk about how purpose can actually become part of your strategy. So what is culture? Of course, it's kind of invisible, it's unseen, but it's basically the norms, right? The patterns of behavior that we exhibit in our work, which are encouraged, discouraged. How do we do things around here? What gets enforced? What gets reinforced? What gets you into trouble? Again, a lot of these are unwritten rules in many cultures, but a conscious culture will have some pretty explicit understanding of what our culture is supposed to be about. And how important is culture? Unfortunately, we don't pay enough attention to culture. I know I teach in a business school, and very few business schools actually have courses about culture, but culture is extremely important. As Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for lunch. And we think maybe it doesn't even wait, right, until lunchtime. Strategy is very important. I don't want to downplay the importance of strategy, but strategy is not a secret, right? Everybody knows most companies' strategy. There are business school cases written about the strategies of many leading companies. Why can we not replicate those companies? Because the cultures are unique, and that's what is homegrown, and that's what ultimately is a huge differentiator. So every company has a culture. Now, what do we mean by conscious culture? First of all, we are conscious about the culture in terms of what we're trying to create, but also that it's connected to the other tenets. It is rooted in purpose. We have a culture that's connected to our purpose, right? It is very heavily rooted in values and not rules. as we say, a handful of values are more powerful than 1,000 different rules, right? So it's rooted in some core values that our company has, and it is very much people-centric. Just like the business overall has to be, as Herb Keller said, the business of business is people, yesterday, today, and forever. So the culture has to really reflect the fact that our business is extremely people-centric. Now, the qualities of a conscious culture, the word that I use is tactile. Tactile is a word that means something that you can touch and feel. And if you think about a culture, you cannot take a picture of it, you can't put it in a box. I mean, it is a highly intangible, invisible thing, and yet you can feel it. When you walk into a Southwest Airlines flight, when you walk into a Trader Joe's, right? When you go to a container store, when you go to Patagonia, REI, Wegmans, you will feel the energy, you will feel the positivity, the enthusiasm, the love, and the care that people have. So it is very tangible, even though it's invisible, right? And you really can't picture it. Oops. I'm sorry, some slides got deleted from this. 1 second, please. I'm sorry, not sure what's happening today. The technology is. Hold on, please. Okay, so the word tactile also stands for the qualities of a conscious culture. It starts with trust. And I'm going to talk about each of these in some detail here, but trust is the foundation, really. Without trust, you really cannot build any kind of a cohesive culture, right? So trust is the starting point. And then accountability and authenticity. Right? There are two A's that come into that. We have to have a culture in which people basically make and keep clear agreements, and we're going to have a session later on with Neha about how can we make and keep very clear agreements so that people are accountable to each other for what we have committed to do together. And it's a culture of authenticity. People are able to be who they are, right? You don't have to put on a mask and armor and show up as somebody else. It's a culture of caring, and that's at the core of it, right? So again, accountability and caring have to go together. We can't have one without the other. It's transparent. There's very few secrets. There's a high level of integrity, commitment to ethics, and keeping your commitments. There's a culture of learning. People are constantly growing and evolving in the culture, and that starts at the top, from the leaders all the way down. And there's a high level of empowerment in the culture, where people are free to use their judgment to do the right things. And it's also egalitarian. We don't have what I call a caste system, right? There are people who are treated very differently, right? There's more high level of equality within the cultures. And again, the key element, I think, with conscious capitalism and conscious cultures is caring. So again, it starts with trust. And we have to have trust at every level. Trust, of course, between the employees, right? Trust between employees and leadership and management, and trust with all of your stakeholders. And trust is something that we have to earn over time. I was in Belgium a few years ago, and there was a big consulting firm that was talking about they had just been hired to do a $500 million project to build trust in a big company. And I said, wow, I didn't know you can buy trust. Trust is something that you earn through your actions, right? That you earn from things that you do every day. You can't just have a big campaign to suddenly build it. And trust is such an important element, it even applies to us at an individual level as human beings. That trust can be something that is a quality that you have, that you choose to trust, that you are just a trusting person, right? Until you are proven that people prove themselves to be unworthy of trust. So that's one way to think about it. The other one is that other people have to earn your trust. So you don't trust anybody until they earn it. And I think all the evidence and my own personal experience would say that I think it's better to actually operate from a place of trust. It's a description of who you are, right? And then once in a while, that trust will be violated, but then you learn from that and you move on, right? And you make sure that you don't trust those people again. This is one of the iconic CEOs from Johnson & Johnson from years ago, James Burke. And this was a company that had the credo and had a tremendous set of values that drove them. And he was a very trusting leader. He said, I have found by trusting people until they prove themselves unworthy that a lot more happens, right? In a high trust culture, there's just so much more productivity and innovation and creativity and teamwork and so forth, right? So you're much better off making that the default setting in the culture. And of course, you can have cultures that have high trust or low trust. And what are some of the differences? So if you have a low level of trust, it's like there's a tax. You're putting a tax on the organization. There are multiple ways in which that shows up. First of all, there's more redundancy. You have to have people watching other people to make sure, that they are doing what they're supposed to do. The ultimate example of that is if you go to Las Vegas in a casino, there are cameras everywhere, and there are people actually who are watching other people who are watching other people just to make sure that everybody is not doing something dishonest, right? So there's a lot more redundancy when you don't have trust. There's also a high level of bureaucracy because you have to put rules and regulations and controls for everything, right? And that, of course, becomes very inefficient and adds to the cost. The high level of politics in an environment that people don't have trust, right? So they are scheming and plotting behind each other's back. People are not engaged. If you don't feel trusted in the workplace, then you don't feel like doing anything. There's a lot of manufacturing context. Bob Chapman will be with us a little bit later, and he'll talk about how he inherited businesses in which they would lock up, the toolbox, the tool shed, right? Because they think people are going to steal tools, and at the end of the day would physically search people to make sure that they're not stealing anything. Those are kinds of actions that tell you, I don't trust you and I don't respect you, right? So the people then don't want to give anything to those companies. And then, of course, that will lead to high employee turnover, right? If you don't feel like you're trusted. It also leads to high churn among your customers, suppliers, and other stakeholders. And it can also lead to high levels of fraud, right? Because when you create this environment of low trust, then people sort of will rise to, or they will go down to the level of expectations that we put upon them. So by the same token, on the other side, instead of taxes, we have dividends. If we create actually a high trust organization, there's much more value that is created. People are operating, in teamwork, and there's a lot more. There's innovation, there's rapid growth, there's collaboration, relationships, better execution, more loyalty. All of those things are sort of the dividends that come from building a culture of trust. The second element is accountability. Right, so everybody has to be accountable for their role in terms of what they're playing in the organization, right? So that requires us to have clear, compassionate, and honest conversations, right? Which means we have to listen deeply, as we talked about in earlier sessions. When you make a mistake, you have to apologize, right? So we have to have a culture in which people it's okay to make mistakes, and also we know how people should acknowledge those mistakes and move on. And then making and keeping clear agreements. And as I said, Neha will take you through an exercise later on about how we can make much better agreements than most people typically do. And we also want authenticity in our culture, which means that you say what you mean and you mean what you say, right? So you can be honest. There's no mask or armor. You can be vulnerable in a conscious culture, right? You don't have to pretend to be somebody that you're not, right? Show up as your whole human self. Vulnerability is such a key element that we have to make sure that every culture has. We, of course, celebrate diversity, and we don't sugarcoat the reality. It's a commitment to the truth. It's a high level of commitment to the truth. So as I said, vulnerability is an ability. It's right in the word, right? It's not a liability. Many people think that if you show vulnerability that you will be perceived as weak. And in some cultures, that is kind of how they look at things. But this is one of the strongest building blocks of a high trust and a high caring culture. And this is something, again, that Bob Chapman and Barry Weymiller completely realized. They've created a culture in which there's a high level of vulnerability. People are actually emotional, and even tears. Men, first time I visited there were literally people who choked up, and I asked them a simple question, and in front of each other, they were willing to get emotional. And that really connects people at a deep level. The next element here is caring. And this is a central element, right? And there's, of course, lots of work. I mean, these are just a sample of some books, Wired to Care. We human beings have a fundamental need to care. And yet our world of business does not really incorporate that. Adam Smith's earlier book, Theory of Moral Sentiments, about that, right? My book, The Healing Organization, is about that. We have a fundamental need. It's the thing that drives us the most when we operate from love instead of fear, and we show caring in the organization. You know, when I started writing The Healing Organization, I went to a Chinese restaurant. In the US, they give you this fortune cookie, and this is the one that I got. It said there are many ways you can be hurtful, but there's only one way to heal, and that is through love. So in our culture, it has to be rooted fundamentally in caring for people as human beings. Jane Dutton is one of the leading academic experts in this field at the University of Michigan, and all her research is about care and compassion in organizations and the power of that. And she says we are born to care. And our organizations, our institutions can either amplify that, magnify that, or they can suppress that. They can take the caring out of us, or they can help us scale our caring through the organization. And of course, caring is contagious. So the way we treat people at work impacts the way they live in their lives, impacts the way they deal with the people that they are leading, right? So it all starts and it emanates from leaders. So setting a contagious culture of caring will then spread that caring throughout the organization. And it is important, I think, to make a distinction between this idea of being kind versus being nice. So when we say a caring culture, we don't mean it's a nice culture where nobody ever points out anything that's wrong. Everybody's always super polite. You're afraid to offend anybody. You will never engage in a disagreement. No, that's not really what we're talking about, right? Running a company based on just being nice can get you in trouble because you don't share difficult feedback or take tough decisions. And that ultimately means that you end up being mediocre or you go out of business, right? So we have to be kind, just like a parent. You know, being a loving parent doesn't mean always saying yes. So being kind doesn't always mean, overlooking some things that should not be overlooked. So being kind actually requires you to be very strong and courageous, and demonstrate candor, be honest in your conversations, and of course caring. So it's interesting, when Bill George became the CEO of Medtronic, he inherited a situation which is the opposite of what many CEOs find. You often find a culture that is all about performance and numbers, but they don't really treat people as human beings. But he found the opposite. He found a culture that was very caring, very people-oriented, value-centered, and mission-driven. So they had purpose and they had a caring culture. But he said the culture was soft. There was no discipline. People operated with excuses and alibis and reasons for non-performance. Products that took 24 months came to market in 48 months later, right? The budgetary controls were weak. So he had to basically bring in sort of the accountability side without losing the caring side. That's the trick. You know, these are like, polarities in a way. We have to have both of them. It's not like we have a caring culture or we have a performance culture or with accountability. We want both, right? So that's really what a truly conscious caring culture is about, is having both of those elements. The next element is transparency, where there are no secrets, right? We operate with a high level of transparency. That typically means in many of these companies, open books, even private companies where the financial information is shared with employees. So you know the reality of how our business is doing. Right, and open doors, right? So you can talk to leaders, etc., at any time. So again, a high level of transparency and operating without secrets. Integrity, strict ethical standards, right, and dealing fairly and openly with all stakeholders. Again, these are basic things, right, that we must have, but it's very important to state that and to have consequences when people do not actually live with integrity. Learning. Every organization has to be continually growing and evolving, just like we as human beings have to continually grow and evolve. We have to have what's now called a growth mindset, right? And this is something a lot of companies have used, like Microsoft used that under Satya Nadella, to say we need to change the culture so that people are not just comfortable and I'm the expert in this and you're the expert in that. And then if there's something else, then, well, I don't know, what that is, and therefore, but that's not in my domain. But as opposed to saying that we are constantly learning and evolving, right? That nothing is fixed. And this again starts at the top. You set an example. Just one illustration of that is the CEO of Accenture, who basically every year will put out a statement saying this is what my agenda is to learn for the next quarter. She does it every quarter, actually. Right, encouraging everybody else to do the same. What are the new skills? What are the new perspectives that I need to gain? Right, and everybody's helping each other on that journey. The next is empowerment, right? That people feel free to actually do what they see as the right thing to do. So that requires a freedom inside the company, and there's two kinds of freedom that we need to have. There's freedom from unnecessary rules, unnecessary bureaucracy and restrictions, and then freedom to create, freedom to innovate, freedom to think outside the box. And both of those are important, right? As I said earlier, a handful of shared values is worth more than 1,000 rules. So you give people some core values and then allow them to make their own decisions in harmony with those. A good example of this is Nordstrom, which is a very well regarded retailer in the US, a very conscious company. And when you join that company on day one, you get this employee handbook. It turns out to be just one page. And it says our number one goal is to provide outstanding customer service, set both your personal and professional goals high, and we have great confidence in your ability to achieve them. So our handbook is very simple. There's only one rule. Use your good judgment in all situations. There will be no additional rules, right? And so that's a very clear statement of what this culture is about, of empowerment. Then, as I said earlier, it's also egalitarian. In most companies, there's kind of a caste system, right? If you look at engagement, if you look at turnover, right? If you look at all the other indicators that we have of culture, you will find that if you divide it between the hourly workers and the salaried professionals, there's a huge difference, right? So we need to make sure that there's a unified culture in our company, that everybody feels valued, everybody has opportunities for growth, everybody is treated with respect. Right? Everybody's together, everybody's respected and a valued member of the team. Now, you know, when you really put culture at the center, what we have found is that for many companies, not only can culture eat strategy for lunch or whatever you want to say about that, but culture can actually become your strategy. That becomes kind of your source of competitive advantage. Not all companies, especially service businesses, have this opportunity. I would say that Trader Joe's and Southwest Airlines are very good examples of this. Trader Joe's is a retailer here in the US, and they're loved. Everybody loves Trader Joe's. They have a very unique product assortment mix, but even more than that, they have a unique culture inside the company, right? And it's just, you know, all the employees are having fun. They're wearing Hawaiian shirts, you know, and they're always eager to help. It's just a culture that actually becomes a bigger source. People enjoy just going there. Right? Same thing with the Container Store. Southwest Airlines, you heard from Haley last time about their purpose, but they're equally renowned for their great culture, people-centered culture. They actually have a culture committee of about 90 people that are elected by the employees, whose job it is to make sure that Southwest is living and breathing their culture at all times, to preserve that culture, right? Which they talk about. They have a servant's heart, they have a warrior spirit, and they cultivate joy and fun. And that's really what you're going to find on Southwest flights. As always, you know, we talk about everything that we do in conscious capitalism is, of course, good for people, is good for communities, good for society, good for the planet, all of that. And those are all extremely important things. We have to always remember that. But at the same time, we don't ask you to sacrifice financial performance. We don't say that we need to be weaker on that dimension so that we can be better. We're saying simultaneously we can be great on both. And so when it comes to culture, if you look at things like the connection between a great place to work, which is a good proxy for culture, right, and financial returns, and this is over a 17-year period, 3 times a higher return, right, for the Fortune 100 best places to work in the US. It also, if you look at employee engagement, another similar measure, you can see that it's positively correlated with profitability, with productivity, with the impact on customers, and then it's negatively correlated with bad things like absenteeism and turnover rates and shrinkage, which is loss of inventory and all of those kinds of things, right? Or even quality defects. The most comprehensive study on this was done by Cotter and Heskett some years ago. And they overall divided cultures into 2 categories. One is the constructive and adaptive culture, which is kind of what we're talking about today. And then the traditional aggressive and unadaptive, sort of rigid culture, which have a lot of strict rules. And you can see revenue growth, stock price appreciation, and net income growth are all dramatically higher for all of those. So I want to, in the last part of our conversation here, share with you a tool that I have found to be the best tool in terms of assessing and then improving your culture. And I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to that today. Richard Barrett is a good friend of ours, and he created this framework for understanding what are the values that drive people as well as organizations, right? And then the key thing that he did was he connected those values to different levels of consciousness with the underlying premise that we need to operate with full spectrum consciousness. What does that mean? That we need to be grounded in the reality of today's business world, right? Or our lives. So our feet are on the ground, our heart is open, and our head is in the sky. So we are thinking and dreaming about bigger things while we are grounded in today's reality of what the business needs to function. And that's really ultimately what this whole journey of conscious capitalism is about. It's not saying that we just need to elevate to higher levels of consciousness. It says we need to include and transcend all the levels of consciousness. And Richard divides these into 7 levels, right? And the bottom 3 are kind of Maslow. You're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Survival needs, relationship needs, self-esteem needs. But then Richard adds these additional layers on top, right? There's transformational motivation. So these are, again, the human needs are physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual in the left column. And that then translates to motivations, survival, relationship, self-esteem, and then transformation, internal cohesion, making a difference in the world, right, and service to humanity, right? So again, each of these, if you think about them in a business context, survival is about financial stability, right, shareholder value, growth, right, employee health and safety. But if you emphasize that too much, if you're just about that, it can get into some negative things like control, too much control, corruption, and greed in pursuit of financial wealth. Second level is relationships, right? Loyalty, communication, satisfaction, friendship. But again, if you have too much of that, it can get into manipulation and blame, right? If there's the unhealthy aspect of that. Self-esteem is about the system. This is about high performance, right? In the case of a business, and that results from having certain systems, processes, best practices, etc. But too much emphasis on that performance can lead to bureaucracy and complacency. So those are some of the negative values that can be associated at that level. And beyond that, for the next 4 levels, continuous renewal and learning, as we talked about, a learning organization, internal community, right, shared values, shared vision, trust belongs here. And then making a difference in the world, alliances and partnerships, and then service to humanity and the planet. Right? That's kind of the highest level. So there are values that map to all of these, right? And so that's really the foundation. So the way that it works is very simple. They give you a list of maybe 100 words, and at a personal level, say which 10 of these words, which are all sort of values and some of behaviors mixed together, reflect who you are today, right? And then what are the words that describe the culture that exists in your organization today? And then what are the words that describe the culture that you would like to see in your organization, right? And you can do this at every level in the organization. You can do it at leadership. You can do it for employees. You can do it across the board and then see how it varies. What leaders think, what middle managers think, what frontline people think, etc. And then you can map it, right? So each of these values, so let's say this was a survey that was done in a strong culture, right? And here are the personal values that people had and the current culture values and the desired culture values. And you see a fair amount of overlap between them. Right, the things that are in orange are common between the current culture as well as the desired culture, right? And also in some of the personal values, right? So what you want to see ultimately is a high level of alignment between these things. And again, I'm just giving you a taste for this today. I don't expect you to grasp everything that I'm saying here, but I just want to introduce the tool. And then each of those values is then mapped to a different level. So those 10 values that I showed on the previous page, one is at a level 7, one is level 6, 4 of them are at level 5, and then you can see the others, right? So these 10 are distributed this way, and the current culture is perfect. It's got all 7 levels represented, right? And that's important. You don't want to not have anything at the base levels, right? Because that you need to make sure that you maintain performance and efficiency and all of that. And the desired culture, you can see that people aspire to have more at certain levels, right? Now you can compare these two cultures. The one on the left, these are the words, the top words that people used to describe the culture. There's client satisfaction, making a difference, integrity, teamwork, humor, quality, ethics, and sustainability. And so all 7 levels are represented. You can see here's another culture where people use words like there's a lot of blame here, there's just short-term focus, a lot of internal competition, passing the buck, which is not taking responsibility, not taking risks. And there's a couple of positive things, customer satisfaction and profit. So those are the two positives down here. But these other circles that are not filled in are basically these are called limiting values, right? Where there's an L. So you can see that we have a lot of limiting values and we have nothing at the higher level. So we have a lot of dysfunction at the lower level, right? And so this is a really, really difficult and challenged culture that needs to change. And Richard has a measure called cultural entropy. Entropy is the amount of disharmony in the system, right? That captures how much conflict, friction, frustration there is in the culture that is going to prevent things from happening, right? So there's a shorthand measure that we can actually derive from that simple data that tells you about that. And here's another case study of Unilever, where they were looking at their culture. This is Unilever in Brazil, right? And you can see that their personal values, current culture values, and desired culture values, there were a lot of, and maybe it's easier for me to show you in this level, right? So the personal values, of course, tend to be relatively positive, and you can see what people had. The current culture had 6 elements that were limiting values down here. Right? Now, there was a service to humanity dimension at the top, but you can see that the culture was missing a lot, and this is not what people aspire to. What people aspire to is on the right? They want a culture that has all those different dimensions. So this is where they brought in a Barrett consultant to work with them to understand what is today's culture, what is the desired culture that people want, and how do we bridge that? How do we go from here to there, right? And over 3 years, this is the transformation that took place. Right, that the country from 2008 to 2011, you can see that instead of having 5 or 6 of these limiting values, we only have 2 over here now, right? And we've got a lot more up here, right? So we were able to cultivate and put into place and make real in the culture these different values now, where people were describing the culture using very different words, right? So again, the top 10 values, you can see, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 negative things here: bureaucracy, short-term, etc. And then in 2011, there were only bureaucracy, and bureaucracy still remained in a large organization, and there were long hours. But you can see a lot more other positive things. So the level of dysfunction or entropy went down from 37% to 20%. And if you look at the performance of the business, the growth rate was less than 1% in 2008, and customer satisfaction was below 60. And now growth rate was above 10%, and customer satisfaction was over 90%, right? So again, there is a business consequence. So if we pay attention to culture, if we build conscious and caring cultures, we will transform our workplaces from places that feel to many people like a prison, right? People feel, they can't wait to get out of the work and actually enjoy their life, right? From a prison to a playground, where people feel valued, there's joy, there's creativity, there's teamwork, there's camaraderie, right? And there's no reason why our work cannot be deeply fulfilling and a source of meaning and purpose for everybody, right? All the way to the front of the organization. And I'll just leave you with this thought. You're going to hear from Bob Chapman later, but one of the ways in which we summarize the message of that book and Bob's life's work as a leader, everybody wants to do better. Trust them. Leaders are everywhere. Find them. People achieve good things, big and small, every day. Celebrate them. Some people wish things were different. Listen to them. Everybody matters. Show them. That's the kind of culture that we want to create. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing here. Let's see. Okay. And turn it back to Hooray.